Good evening and welcome to Zion's Banner. And by the looks of it, I'm in 1 minute of the time I was supposed to start. So we've gotten rid of those beginnings, and that lovely music is there for you to relax by if you should end up tuning in before the time of the actual broadcast, which some people like and some people don't. So we're actually getting started. Now, this verse came up because I had seen an argument. This is the type of verse that is often used in Jewish circles in order to justify the idea that some sort of righteousness can be obtained through keeping Torah or the mitzvot before God. And so this is a typical verse. And when I looked at this verse, it sounded very much like it could be saying just that. And so I'm going to move through this, and I'm going to take us first to the passage because I like using Logos Bible software. You'll notice that I can highlight passages. Let me get that up there in green here. And you can actually highlight concepts, passages, or key words. And so I'm going to make this a little bigger so you can see it a little better. And what we're looking at is Deuteronomy 6:25. And the thing up there says through 7:1, but we're really not going to look all the way through 7:1. The Hebrew, the English, and the Greek are there. That's the other nice thing is I used to have to carry 3 different books to go ahead and do that. And so I have my polyglot up. And when you read it in English, now listen to the way it sounds in English. It will be righteousness for us if we are careful to observe all these commandments before the Lord our God as he has commanded. And so if you were to read that, it would be very easy for a Jewish person to say to you, well, now see, I have a clear verse here that says it will be righteousness for us. Therefore, keeping the commandments gives us righteousness before God, or acts as righteousness before God. For us, that is actually righteousness. And so this idea of by faith alone and not through the law is really a misrepresentation of the Hebrew scriptures and of the idea that the Hebrew scriptures have in mind. And after all, faith is simply obeying God, and see, it works out perfectly for us. And we'll dig further into that. But this is the type of verse that's often used and could be confusing to the individual reading it. Now, think about me before I ended up. We're going to have some real strong alerts here. I hope everything works. We have major monsoons in the area causing flooding and coming in and out. And so there's a lot of streets that are beginning to flood and other things. You wouldn't think that would happen in Arizona, but it does. And so that's the verse we're looking at. And for a Jewish person like me, someone could point out that verse and say, see, it's righteousness for us if we keep this. And so we're going to talk about this particular verse as a verse that Singer might use and that Muslims might pick up on. And so I'm going to our overarching understanding of what this program is going to do. I have some goals. This program will convey, which is what the apologist believes. And let me state this. The law was an instrument of covenant and never an end in itself. It was intended to regulate God's relationship with theocratic Israel as a people. It was never intended to be personal justification before God. Now, let me unwrap that for you. I look at the law as an instrument of covenant in terms of national Israel. And I think that would solve a lot of our problems if we indeed do that. Now, you might say, why do I spend so much time on the law? Because the incarnation, the Trinity, and the place of the law are probably 3 huge issues for Jewish people. You could say that's the Trinity of objections. And even though those aren't the objections stated, they often are the objections that are actually there. So when Singer talks and he starts talking about an objection, he's actually looking at those things. He's actually really, if you really, what gets you really mad about Jesus and Christianity? Well, he'll say, well, it's multiple gods. Well, okay, that's the Trinity. He'll say God can't become a man because then you have multiple gods or you're worshiping a man. But ultimately, he will say, because Torah is what we're supposed to keep. Those other things are real issues, but Torah is what became the first issue, in a sense, for believers in the early period of Christianity. When you were Jewish believers, it was expected that you would engage, and that Torah would be regarded as a key thing. And so the difference in the way Torah was viewed, in fact, it is Jacob Neusser in his article, The Annotated New Testament, that talks about the fact that for the Jewish people who were part of Judaism, the idea that God could be reached, or the channel for communication, relationship with God, wasn't the law, was problematic. So the place of that, I almost want to grab that book for you. I don't have the advantage of having, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put this up on the large slide, grab the annotated New Testament here, right up on the board. Sorry about that. That's my clever little trick to grab this baby. And I'm going to go ahead and put this up. I'm going to remove this, and I'm going to point to this. This is the annotated New Testament. It really is a really good book. And so I'm going to go to the section in the back here, and I think I marked it. And Neusser ends up talking a good deal in his section on the law, and states what the real bone of contention was between Judaism in Jesus's day and him. Now, things have changed a little bit, but this has to do with the real bone of contention that we find. Now, atonement's an issue. There are other issues, but let's talk about righteousness and the issue of, and I'm looking at the in-text essays, and I don't really want the in-text essays. I want the essays outside of the text here. And I'm looking at the different views, table fellowship. This actually has some incredible sections in the back of it with stuff. And what I'm really looking for is Neusser, and I just had him. And of course, this is not set up according to author. I almost wish it was, because then it would be really even more useful in the sense of going to the exact page. And I don't want to tie us up, but on the other hand, I think this is really worthwhile. Here we go. Jewish Reflection on Christian Claims, 724. So I'm going to go to the back here of 724. And this is Neusser. Now, Neusser is a Talmudist. He writes Talmud. He does Talmud. And he falls under Orthodox Jewish thought, and has done an incredible amount with, actually, my resources for Talmud are Neusser. Okay? And I hope you'll claim with me, but what he's analyzing is Jewish Christian claims, and he's reflecting on them as an Orthodox Jew. In fact, he says, in 1993, I published a short volume, A Rabbi Talks with Jesus, by Doubleday, McGill Press. Now, I don't have that particular work, but I want to get to the last paragraph here. For Jesus and Paul, however, that faith based in Jesus himself, and it was the replacement for Torah with Jesus as the incarnation, as the authority, and as the word of God, is where the church and synagogue, Christianity and Judaism part. So you see the significance of this. The idea that faith based in Jesus was the replacement for Torah, and Jesus was the incarnate word, and he, as authority in the word of God, replace Torah, or actually supersede Torah, might become the final authority, or have authority over Torah, might be a better way to put it. I don't want us to sound like we believe in abrogation. That's what Islam believes in. But I want you to see the import of this whole issue. And it's the reason that I go back to it, because the idea that Jesus has ultimate authority, even over Torah, as the living word, and that faith in him, instead of Torah, becomes a channel for reaching God apart from Torah, is a big deal. I hope I'm not losing folks. because every so often I see numbers change and I'm not quite sure why. But that's okay. We'll just go forward and see where we go. Is a really big issue. And so I thought I'd take a little bit with this verse that seems to say that. We are not going to discuss Paulinian theology of the law in any depth. I had to read a lot of books related to Paul's view of the law, among other things. Actually, I don't know how many I've read because there were a lot of other areas, but I did have to do some serious reading on Paulinian theology. Hey, thanks to the Facebook person who put the thumbs up, because that actually appeared to me. So I know someone on the Facebook is watching. Praise God. And so this becomes a real issue. And I can't really, there have been volumes written on Paulinian theology, but we do need to talk about Paul's view of righteousness and the law. Now, first of all, Paul is the whipping boy. So if you aren't attacking Jesus, you're attacking Paul. Okay? I mean, it's one or the other. Basically, I want to show you that Paul's view of the law was not much different than Jesus's, which was not different really in a context of Second Temple Judaism that was outside the pale too much. Paul says that the commandment is holy, the law is holy, and the commandment is holy, righteous, and good. Paul's problem is not with the law. Paul has a Christological view of everything, and to him, Jesus is the embodiment of everything. Okay, he is the living Torah. He is the channel of covenant. He is the means of entering into covenant. Paul is totally Jesus-centered, which is, by the way, why he isn't necessarily read in some Messianic synagogues, because, frankly, he creates problems. Now, understanding the duration of the law. Now, the problem is Paul believed, and by the way, this belief was allowable in Second Temple Judaism, although not necessarily did everyone like it, but it was certainly within the pale of what was allowed, that the law was temporary. Now, Moses Maimonides, we've talked about this, slams the door on this idea, but this idea is upheld. In my dissertation, I talk about collateral reading related to this very idea. There was the idea in Judaism that the Messianic age would bring in new Torah or even a change in Torah. That was the idea. Now, when I say Torah, I'm referring to the 5 books of Moses and the commandments contained therein. And so Paul holds to the idea that the Messianic age will bring a massive total change. Now, what Paul understands and what people who are watching this need to understand is we are not waiting to enter into the Messianic age. We are waiting for the kingdom to be inaugurated. The Messianic age actually begins, and we're in it, related to Jesus going ahead. And while the kingdom is not established, he inaugurates the new covenant, and the Messianic age is what we're in. And so Paul says, now when faith has come, we're no longer under the supervision of the law. So Paul doesn't view the law as bad. He views the law as giving way to the Messianic age, which was an allowable consideration. I ended up reading a book called The Sages. It was Eliezer Urbach. It wasn't Eliezer Urbach. It's in my dissertation. I can't bring it up right now. I make reference to it, but he talks a good deal about this and comes to the conclusion that this was allowable. And some of the kickback against this idea was actually polemic against Messianic faith or the beginnings of Christianity. So Paul views the law as temporary, but that view was not considered outside the pale of orthodoxy within groups at the time. It was something that was out there, whether it was the majority view or not. Paul's understanding of the use of the law was put in charge of us, and we're going to talk about this. And I keep going back to the pedagogos, because you have to understand that Paul's view of the law as a regulatory or a regulator person until the Messianic age is key to understanding his theology in a lot of ways, and particularly in Galatians. And the purpose of the law was to lead us to Messiah. Now, what most Christians take that as is that the law was only there to convict us of sin. I saw this in some writings, and I don't think that goes to where it needs to go. I just don't. Having looked at the pedagogos and its purpose as supervisory, I think that falls slightly short. And so I don't think that that's legitimate. I think it's not enough. It's just not enough. I think there's more to it than that. And so often when we end up saying that, I think we're shorting sound theology. We're not going as far as we could, and we're not getting out of it what we can. And so I see that as falling short of what we should have in our heads. Okay. And so that's basically where we're at. I want you to understand Paul's use of the law. The law had a purpose that is fulfilled in the Messianic age and in the person of Messiah. And that's his view of the law. Okay. Now, before you even ever look at a chapter, you need to understand why the book is there. I always go back to this because you can't understand the context of a statement, and most misinterpretations or polemics will short the context. So let's go back to it. And if you watch this show long enough and nothing else, you're going to get some really good overarching theology. Deuteronomy is a repetition of the law by Moses before they enter the land based on roughly four final sermons. So I want you to think of these a little bit as sermons. This is his final words to Israel, preparing them for entering the land. So this is all preparatory. You need to understand this in terms of the land. God, the land, and the people are in covenant relationship with each other. The purpose of Paul giving this information is so that they will be blessed in the land. I mean, not Paul. I'm sorry, Moses. I'm so sorry that I said Paul. It was Moses. Moses' purpose is not to get individual Israelites saved. We tend to think that all the Bible writers are simply doing what I do on a street corner when I go out to street preach. Paul's purpose is to get these guys ready for entering the land. Remember that they had a 400-year hiatus from doing what they were supposed to do. We don't need this again. And so Paul wants to get them ready to enter the land. And they're blessing and maintaining in the land and experiencing the presence of God, which came with that, was predicated on them following the covenant. And the covenant was regulated through the law of Moses. So Jewish people today that think that they're made righteous through the law are not even understanding what the law was supposed to do. Now, they're right, it was given to the Jewish people, and they're right, it gave them a unique identity, but they're wrong about the purpose of the law. The law was not simply, and this is why I don't believe it's another gospel. I can believe Israel and the church are separate without believing that dispensationalism creates some sort of second gospel, because I understand what the law was supposed to do for a theocratic nation. Now, could you get saved? Yes, you could. It is so good to see my sister from down under, Slam. I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad you were reading, but I'm glad you're with us. Built for speed, excellent. Thank you for joining. This is going to give us a context for this verse, because this verse looks like saying the law will be righteousness for us before God. And then someone could say, well, several things. First of all, someone could say, and a Muslim might even say, look at this verse that says Moses' law was righteousness for the children of Israel, and now the gospel is righteousness. See, the gospel abrogated the law. So you guys believe in abrogation as much as we do, that certain verses replace other verses and take over them. And that's kind of the way abrogation works, is by replacement. And they might say that. A Jewish person might say, well, this idea of justification by faith, well, the law will be righteousness before us. But they're misunderstanding the purpose of the law. And I think that's what Paul gets, not understanding the righteousness of God. They seek to establish their own righteousness because they didn't understand what the law's purpose was. And the law was not a means of personal acceptance before God. Now, let me stick this back up and add this to the stream. And so this gives us the background of the verse. And the background is vital because a verse without a context is a pretext. And so I'm going to move on in my next thing here. The Shema is key. Now, understand that your Bible is laid out in a divinely inspired structure. And although the chapter divisions aren't there, there is what we call the flow of the text. And we need to ask why things are written before other things. Prior to Deuteronomy 6:25 and following is the Shema. Shout out to Brother Brian. And it says, what's up and chat? And I think he means what's up with the chat. And so I hope that's working for you. And you need to understand that one of the things that Michael Brown points out in his commentary is that the Shema preceding this is absolutely vital. We have two things that precede this verse. We have the Shema and what's called the Decalogue. You're used to hearing it as the 10 Commandments. I'm going to call it the Decalogue, which is the 10 words, which is what Jews have always called it. The Decalogue precedes this passage. Now, the important thing to understand is that the Shema is a statement of allegiance. I understood it right before I was saved as a kid because it was my oath of fealty to the king, and that's really what it's about. And so prior to the 10 Commandments, we have a statement of allegiance. And the 10 Commandments don't start with the command. Most people think that the first commandment in the 10 Commandments is actually a command, but actually God doesn't start the 10 Commandments with a command. Okay? He starts the 10 Commandments with a statement related to faith. So it's Deuteronomy 5, okay, the 10 Commandments. I want you to see the way this starts. And I'm going to bring this up larger because I want you to see the way the 10 Commandments start. Now, he's just calling Israel together. And in Deuteronomy, there's a little bit of a prologue here, okay, that starts this. Okay? And so he explains that, he got this right from God. Okay? Here is the beginning of your 10 Commandments. And I want you to see it. Okay? Now, this is not accidental that God does this. You can have a whole appreciation for the 10 Commandments after this. An appreciation maybe others won't have. At least I hope you will. Okay? In the Hebrew, which I got to bring back up here, and it's really verse 6, and it's not showing as well as I'd like. There it is. Anochi Adonai Elohecha Asher Hotzi. And I'm having a problem with the vowel pointing. Taicha. Okay. And what we have here is Anochi Adonai Elohecha. I am the God who, and that's Hotzianu. Hotzianu mi Mitzrayim. See, I remember from Hebrew school. Hotzianu mi Mitzrayim. But it's I brought you from Me'eretz Mitzrayim, from the house of Egypt. This is where it starts, and this is where the rabbis have always believed that the 10 Commandments, that things start. You have to understand that. There are redeemed people when they receive the commandments. That's what we get out of that. There are redeemed people before they receive the commandments, and before there's any discussion of the law in terms of righteousness, there is a statement of allegiance that Israel is supposed to keep in mind. So Paul starts with allegiance, and the Ten Commandments begin with a statement reminding Israel that they were redeemed. In other words, the commandments are given to a redeemed, physically redeemed community that was redeemed by God. Now, I want to clarify, they were not spiritually redeemed, they were physically redeemed. But the commandments are given to a redeemed community. All right? Physically redeemed. The Shema precedes a statement related to any sort of connection between righteousness and keeping the commandments. In other words, if the allegiance isn't there, then the other makes no sense at all. If they weren't redeemed, God would not be making the covenant, giving them the covenant instruction. They're covenanted before they get the instruction. So their keeping of the instruction is not the reason they have a covenant. They have a covenant prior to. That's why a straight legalistic system is something that even Judaism couldn't quite, wasn't quite. All right? The juxtaposition is that it's reasonable to believe that these two verses, and let me explain what I mean by this. The fact that the Shema comes before these verses, it is reasonable to believe that the two verses we're going to look at are the means of living out the Shema. Okay? In other words, God is telling them, or Moses is reiterating to them, how the Shema, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your might, is to be lived out. In other words, the juxtaposition of the statement of allegiance precedes the statement about righteousness, because it is reasonable to believe that the statement about the commandments functioning is in terms of being an instrument of their allegiance. Does that make sense? Because it makes sense to me. How do I have allegiance to God? Well, this is the way you'll demonstrate your allegiance to God. But that still doesn't help us. It still sort of sounds like righteousness. Well, one thing that we can know for sure, the Decalogue is a requirement for the nation. Each individual has to do it, but it's given to the nation. God introduced it as there's no indication it ever was intended to be a way of individual righteousness. Okay? In fact, and there's the comment, you believe, then you obey. Now let's get that clear. Often I hear that the Old Testament is about the law and the New Testament is about grace. Boy, I dislike that. Michael Brown says the same thing that I've spent time saying. Know me, then serve me. First believe, then obey. And that's why he begins with that statement, and it's to a physically redeemed community, because worship follows redemption. Worship follows redemption. Proper worship cannot be given in the context apart from redemption. And you know what? The New Testament isn't the only place this is taught. The Old Testament is the way this is taught too. And he brings this up in page 62 when they're dealing with this very question. Now let's talk about the passage itself, because I think I've laid some groundwork to the idea that allegiance is illustrated by obedience, but it is not created by obedience. In other words, checking it off doesn't make us truly having allegiance to God. Okay? But still, it still sounds like it'll be righteousness for us if we're careful to observe all this stuff. Does it still sort of sound like that? Well, good. Let's talk about the Hebrew phrase. First of all, I want you to see the for us. Tiyeh lanu. I want you to see the phrase for us, or to us, or even concerning us. It's a lamed prefix here. The context is Moses is not addressing just individuals. He's addressing the nation. These are sermons to the nation, not sermons to each individual. He's not running out on the street and saying, be saved by keeping the law. He's saying it will be for us righteousness. It will stand in the place of righteousness. Not that it will give us righteousness, not that it will be considered by God to replace any need for righteousness. No, it will act for us in the stead of righteousness as a nation if we do this. Well, that still sounds horrible, doesn't it? Well, it sort of does still sound horrible, but let's talk about the word righteousness. It's a good time to do our Hebrew word for today. Our Hebrew word for today, it's tzedakah, is our Hebrew word for today. And that's our Hebrew word. And you know, I used to do that Hebrew word thing. Well, this is our Hebrew word for tonight. The root connotates conformity to an ethical or moral standard. In other words, righteousness means that you're straight. You conform to the plumb line. You're plumb. Okay? You know, when you're a layer of bricks or a mason, you use a plumb line. Okay? And you can't see this because I did not put myself back in here. You use a plumb line to see so that your wall is straight. Okay? And the idea of sadiq, which is where this word comes from, is that it's plumb. Okay? And it has the idea of being straight. Isn't that interesting? The opposite of being straight is not being gay, it's being crooked. Okay? Because the opposite of following something that's plumb is not being happy, it's being crooked. And that's kind of my take on that. And so it's used that way. It's conformity to a moral standard or norm. Okay? I put this up, and I'm going to try to put it up full for you. Okay? Logos lets you see how Hebrew words are used. And so a cool thing you can do is a Hebrew word study here, where I clicked on righteousness, and then I saw the Hebrew words that are used for righteousness. They're all connected to the root tzedek or tzaddik. All right? They're all, you can see, they're all conformed. Slam will appreciate that. Others would too. And they're tzedakah, honesty, justice, justness, community, loyalty, entitlement, just cause, just deeds are words associated with that particular form of that Hebrew word. Accuracy, to be right, is only one of them. To be just or innocent, it's tzaddik. It's the word we get saint from. And they're all centered around here. Here's the one that we're really kind of concerned about here, is this one here. And I want you to see honesty, justice, and the ones associated with it. And I went to that, and Brother Brian says Isaiah 28:16 says plumb line. Yeah, they weren't ashamed of that word. It was an understood concept in that day. Okay. Now let's put the definition of the word into the equation. Okay. Given the word righteousness as the idea of conformity to a moral standard, then let's read the verse that way. Then it will be conformity to God's standard for us if we're careful to observe these commandments as He has commanded us. Didn't say anything about salvation. Didn't say anything about right standard before God. It will be as, or it will be conformity. And by the way, for us there indicates that this functions that way, not that everybody who does it is perfectly spiritually righteous. And so this righteousness idea has the idea of being justified, but it has other ideas of conformity. Now, justification is where God conforms us. Well, I got to be careful. Sanctification is God conforming us. Justification is where God considers us straight, where he considers us plumb, even though we haven't been plumb. All right? It will be plumbness for us. It will be straightness for us if we do this. This will function to help keep us on a straight line. Not it will be salvation for us. Okay? Now, let's say we understand that word as loyalty. Now, why would I understand that word as loyalty? Because when we go back here to Logos, okay, and we go back to it here, and I can do this, okay? Well, I'll go back to the other slide. I don't usually go backwards to go forwards, but occasionally you got to do it, you know? You just got to. You can see that loyalty is included as a concept, okay? So let's just be nice about this. Let's say that the idea is loyalty. Well, let's read it as if it was loyalty. Now, what I'm doing is I'm taking the range of meaning and I'm plugging it in the text. Now, what you might want to do beyond that is figure out which best fits the context here. Okay? I think either of these concepts Built for Speed put something up. I almost want him to define that, but that's for later. I could put either of these concepts. Okay. And both of these sort of fit. Moses could be saying, as they get ready to enter the land, that it will be loyalty towards God for us. We'll be demonstrating our loyalty if we're careful to do what God says. Or he could be saying God will consider it as a conformity to his moral desire for us if we do what God has said. Okay? And both of those are perfectly legitimate. And I would say either end of that word within the range is permissible. One might argue that one's better than the other, but I'm willing to say both of them have some value. Remember that the law was a instrument of regulating the covenant. It was the means by which he regulated the covenant he had with Israel. And if we take it as regulating the covenant, then they could demonstrate their loyalty to God by accepting or conforming to the instrument that God has designed to regulate his covenant. But it in no way infers that sinless righteousness can be gotten through the law. See, that's a misappropriation of this verse. Whoops. Okay? And that's the way this is being used. When someone tries to use it this way, what they're stating is that the law functioned not as a plumb line or not as a regulator of covenant. Okay? But as something else. Brother Brian, put the verse up there and clarified that for us. So thank you. It also includes blood atonement. Now, see, no observation of the law now includes blood atonement. So whatever law Moses is talking about, it is not the same. In fact, one of the interesting things is I got a call from a fellow apologist, and she was talking to a guy who grew up in Orthodox Judaism. And one of the things I said to her is that what you can do with your Jewish friend is when he says something like, oh, we don't believe in Jesus because he was apostate, ask him which Judaism was Jesus apostate in relation to. Which Judaism would consider Jesus apostate? Because, again, what we're dealing with is the fact that there's no sacrificial system. Okay? It would be like saying, sure, God will accept me as righteous if I offer sacrifices and pray, even though I am a thief and don't honor my parents. And what he's saying is that, the sacrificial system is part of this, and no Israelite would say to himself, God will accept me as righteous if I keep some of the commandments, but they're all keeping some of the commandments. Okay? Let's talk about the pedagogos, because the pedagogos is a really cool picture that Paul pulls out that existed within Greek society. And if you understand the pedagogos, then you also understand the law as having an instrument, having the purpose of being an instrument and not an end in itself. Paul's understanding of the pedagogos is it's a temporary function in relation to the people and the covenant, and is no way hampered by this verse. In other words, Paul's comprehension of the law isn't hampered by this verse. Let me kind of explain again. You know, if you can get a New Testament, if you can understand the pedagogos, you can sort of understand Paul's thinking in relation to Galatians. It was a temporary role. Kids didn't just get control, okay, and their fathers. You know, think about a nanny, okay, for a little bit, okay. A nanny sort of serves the function like a pedagogos, okay, and a nanny would be in charge of the children until they reached an age where they no longer needed a governess or a governess, okay. Same sort of role that the pedagogos played. And what he's doing in Galatians, and part of it is discussing us as sons. And once we are in full sonship, we do not need the pedagogos. You do not need the child babysitter when the child is an adult. And so he uses the analogy of the law being a pedagogos in that it had a temporary function. One of the obvious aspects of the pedagogos in any culture was it was temporary. Now, I'm actually quoting from something I quoted in my dissertation, which was a paper done by Michael Smith called The Role of the Pedagogos in Galatians that came out of Bibliotheca Sacra in 2006, which was a really good paper. The pedagogos was temporary. And the pedagogos was to guarantee the behavior of the child until the child could reach an age of majority. And so it regulated God's covenant, and it functioned temporarily until the greater thing could come. Whoa. Okay. It says summary slide, but I don't know how summary it is. Now let's go back to our verse and understand the reasons. Now what I said was I wanted to demonstrate that the law had an instrumental value for Israel. We know that the law was not an end in itself. It regulated covenant, and that can be inferred from the relationship of this verse to the Shema. In other words, how do we demonstrate our allegiance? It can be demonstrated through the fact that the word Sadiq, it will be Sadiq for us, not we will be righteous because we keep it, indicates here, okay? If Moses had wanted to say we will be righteous if we keep it, he could have said that. We will be made righteous, and you could use a causative. We will be caused to be righteous if we keep it. He doesn't use the causative here. Okay, that's a particular form of the word. Okay, in fact, this word is a noun. If he wanted to say that the law made us righteous, he could have used a causative. We will be caused to be righteous if we do this. He doesn't. He picks the noun, and there's the form of the word be. We will become, it will become. What will become? Well, the subject here is righteousness. Righteousness, it will become for us. It will become that for us, not we will become that because of it. And so even the structure of the Hebrew sentence doesn't allow for that, even though I didn't have a slide for it. That's like your bonus round. It's corporate, not individual. There's our lanu again, for us. And so this verse is not saying what it's saying. This verse also includes the book of Leviticus, which is the entire sacrificial system, which is not in play for Jews nowadays. At best, what Moses is telling the people is this will function as a demonstration of your allegiance. This will function as an instrument by which you can function as a covenant community before God. Okay, it will be an instrument for you before God so that you can adhere to God's moral norms. At best, it's saying that. It's probably what it is saying. But what it's not saying is that it makes us righteous. And by the way, the Septuagint is even more fascinating because this word, which is the translation for tzaddik, in the Greek New Testament, has the idea of mercy. And so when the Septuagint Jews translated this, it will be a mercy for us if we keep God's law, certainly doesn't add to that understanding. And so what we see here is that this verse, if it's used that way, is misappropriating. But what we also end up seeing is that the law seemed to be an instrument for Israel as a kind of governance for them until the new covenant could come. And it functioned as this governor, and it was an instrument. It was the means by which God regulated his covenant with Israel and regulated Israel under his covenant. But at no time did the law ever make one righteous. It didn't justify. To justify is to make one in right standing with. The law didn't make one in right standing with. It stood as an instrument by which Israel could demonstrate loyalty to God and live as a covenant community. And so this verse doesn't prove that. It never proves justification by the law. And it's already given to a redeemed community, although physically redeemed. It is not given to those who don't want to follow God as a means of being okay. It is not even given to those who want to follow God as a means of being right in right standing before a holy God. And so hopefully I demonstrated my thesis tonight through this PowerPoint. I'm starting to sound like I'm back in my doctorate. I demonstrated my thesis. And you get that. Now, Brother Brian ended up pulling up the word plumb line. I'd almost be curious to go to the verse. Can I do that? Can I give you a little bit more here? Because when I see a verse, I almost got to go to it. I'm compulsive that way. And see what the original says. I'm really kind of compulsive. 28:17. And I like to look up verses in the original language. Measuring line is the word plumb line. And here's the neat thing. It's the same Hebrew word. Vitsadika. Oh, sorry. Righteousness. So I'm a little down here. Plumb line is up here. I thought it might be the same word, but the problem is it follows on the same word. Righteousness, the plummet or plumb line. So it's part of or connected to the participial phrase. What Sadiq is here is justice. I will also make Sadiq. Okay. Let me pull that up. Okay. And it just gives me the noun. Okay. I will make justiceness the measuring line and righteousness, there it is, the plummet. So there you are. The verse is there. I thought it was, but it's just prepositionally connected to. So don't want to be too cool and too quick on the line. Oh, let me correct this too. It's not a preposition, it's a conjunction. Got to highlight the right stuff. But it's sadika. I was looking at this, so my eyes went a little down. And that's because this is not stretched out right. So I've got this lamed hanging in the middle of midair here. Really bad news. Vitsadika. Okay, and righteousness. By the way, these are in parallel. Justice, the measuring line. So Dadik is in parallel to justice there. And so we kind of get a feel for what's meant by the word Sadiq. So okay. So I think that these can be proven, and I think a better understanding of the law can be given. This verse doesn't say that. It doesn't say that at all. So we kind of know where to deal with this verse. Tomorrow, we're going to look at the resurrection. And we're going to look at Jesus's pre-set up appointment with his disciples that he set up even before he was crucified. And what that's all about. So, kind of glad we made it through the storms. I don't know if there's anything else here. I'm trying to read that. Scholar B. I think that's like be a scholar. Bill for Speed, you can help me there. Because it looks like B stands for the form of be. So, and the verb is after. So, all right. Jack Ray says, thank you. He knows we're wrapping up. The weather's warming up in Australia. Well, the weather is not cooling down enough in Phoenix, but we are getting it better. It just got really humid. Welcome to the desert. Slam showed us the Hebrew word Sadiq. You can change the font on that a little bit, but she's got it up there. And I think she's got some of the markings with it too, but I can't tell. Well, we got one Facebook person. I'm going to be fascinated to figure out who that is. Oh, wow. Jordan. That's my son-in-law. I am so excited. So, wow. That is just phenomenal. I want to say, Jordan, say hi to my daughter for me. By the way, that's Pastor Jordan Bradley of the Peru Grace Brethren Church. So that is really exciting. Thank you for the thumbs up. So, excellent. Well, we're going to finish a few minutes earlier, and I'm going to join my family tomorrow. The resurrection and the pre-appointed meeting. Okay. I appreciate that. Slam says she can't change the font in chat. I appreciate that. Scholar Brian. Okay. Okay. I got it. I got to know what's going on. I got a context. So, and I think, was it Brian that threw that up there? Oh, yeah. Brian was right on the plumb line thing. I get it. All right. All righty. Well, so much for Rabbi Singer's use of Deuteronomy. Thank you, Brother Brian. Well, see, hearing that from a scholar, Brother Brian, I really appreciate that. Excellent. And I got a pastor on. Jordan's a little biased, though, but it's a good bias. And I don't think he's being, disingenuous or anything. I don't want to do anything like that, but I really appreciate it. I love talking theologically with my son-in-law. So it is just fun having him on the show. Okay. Thanks to Slam. And I am praying for Australia. I keep reading weirder and weirder things. That's just a note. Australia's going through stuff. Guys, there are Christians trapped in Afghanistan. I need to put them on my prayer list. You probably should too. Step backwards, But there's actually a church in Afghanistan. So we can remember them too. I guess it is that time as the storms circle around us. And so I'm going to do an Erev Tov. Hope to see you guys again soon. And I'm going to remove this. Boom. There I am. I'm back again. And say bye.